The great chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of empty space. It floated between 2 dying stars, built from crystals that had seen the birth of galaxies. Inside, 12,000 beings from across the known universe had gathered to watch the trial. Ambassador stepped through the entrance gate and felt the weight of alien eyes upon her. She was tall for a human woman, with black hair cut short and practical. Her diplomatic uniform was simple, dark blue fabric with Earth's symbol on her shoulder. She had represented humanity for 15 years across dozens of alien councils, but she had never felt so small. Behind her walked the human delegation, scientists, engineers, soldiers, and one man who looked like he had wandered in by accident. Was 34 years old. He had messy hair that he had forgotten to comb. His shoes were old and worn. He carried no weapons, no tools, no impressive technology. He looked around the great chamber with the calm curiosity of a man visiting a new restaurant, not a man whose performance would decide the fate of his entire species. The collective had ruled this sector of space for 9 million years. They were beings of living crystal, tall and sharp and beautiful. Light passed through their bodies and came out changed, carrying memories and emotions that humans could barely understand. They had watched countless species rise and fall. They had seen empires burn and civilizations crumble to dust. And they had decided that humanity needed to prove itself. The Arbiter stood at the center of the chamber. It was larger than the others, nearly 4 meters tall. Its body was made of deep purple crystal that pulsed with inner light. When it spoke, its voice came from everywhere at once. The human delegation has arrived. Let the trial begin. Bowed in the way she had been taught. We thank the collective for this opportunity. Humanity is ready to demonstrate its worth. The Arbiter's crystal form flickered. It might have been amusement, it might have been contempt. You understand the stakes, Ambassador. If your representative fails, humanity will be classified as a protected species. You will lose all rights to travel beyond your home system. Your technology will be limited. Your expansion will end. We understand, said. And you understand the challenge. We do. The Arbiter turned its attention to the other competitors. There were 12 of them, each from a different elder race. They stood in a line, waiting to be acknowledged. The first was Al, a massive from the Dominion. Its body was covered in black armor that could withstand the heat of a star's surface. Its species had conquered 300 worlds through strength alone. When it moved, the floor trembled. The second was a being of pure light from the illuminated ones. It had no solid form, only patterns of energy that shifted and danced. Its species had existed before matter itself had cooled from the fires of creation. They thought in mathematics and dreamed in equations. The others were equally impressive. A liquid metal shapeshifter, a creature that existed in 11 dimensions at once. A being made entirely of magnetic fields. Each one represented millions of years of evolution, civilizations that had mastered the fundamental forces of the universe. And then there was, standing at the end of the line, looking at his worn shoes. The challenge is simple, the Arbiter announced. Each competitor will be placed in a forge chamber. They will be given nothing, no materials, no tools, no energy source. From absolute emptiness, they must forge a weapon worthy of cosmic recognition. The time limit is 1 standard cycle, approximately 32 of your human hours. The crowd murmured with anticipation. This was a famous trial, one that had been used for thousands of years. It tested not just skill, but creativity, resourcefulness, and the fundamental nature of each species. The illuminated one flickered with confidence. It didn't need materials. It could weave weapons from pure thought. Clicked its massive jaws. Its body carried trace elements from 100 conquered worlds. It would have plenty to work with. Raised his hand. The Arbiter paused. No competitor had ever interrupted the opening ceremony before. You have a question, human. Yes, Can I look around the chamber before we start?" 12,000 aliens stared at him. Some laughed, strange sounds that echoed through the crystal walls. Others simply looked confused. "You wish to inspect your forge chamber?" "If that's allowed." The arbiter considered this. "It is not forbidden. You may examine your workspace before the trial begins." Nodded politely, "Thank you." Grabbed his arm as he walked past. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Do you have a plan?" Smiled at her. It was the smile of a man who had once rebuilt a broken engine using only wire and hope while his bled out around him. "I always have a plan, Ambassador. It's just not finished yet." The competitors were led to their chambers. Each one was a perfect cube, 50 meters on each side. The walls were made of crystal, smooth and flawless. Inside there was nothing. No air, no light, no temperature, true emptiness. Floated into his chamber wearing his environment suit. The suit was standard issue, nothing special. It had 12 hours of oxygen, basic heating, communication systems, and an emergency beacon. That was all. He looked around carefully. He touched the walls. He examined every corner. He spent 30 minutes just floating in the darkness, thinking. In the viewing gallery, watched him with growing worry. The other competitors had already started working. Was generating heat from its body, melting down trace elements it had hidden in its armor. The illuminated one was bending light itself into solid forms. The shapeshifter was dividing parts of its own body to use as materials. But just floated there, doing nothing. "What is he waiting for?" one of her aides asked. "I don't know," admitted. On Earth, billions of people watched the broadcast. In a small apartment in Seoul, a woman named sat with her daughter on her lap. Was 6 years old. She didn't understand why everyone was so worried. "When will make something?" asked. Stroked her daughter's hair. "Soon, baby, your father is thinking." "But the other ones are already making things." "Your father is different. He always thinks first. He told me once that the most important part of building something isn't the building. It's understanding what you really have to work with." Considered this with the seriousness of a child. What does have? Looked at the screen. Her husband floated alone in absolute darkness, surrounded by nothing at all. "I don't know," she whispered, "but if anyone can find something in nothing, it's him." In the chamber, finally stopped moving. He had finished his inspection. He understood his situation now. They had given him nothing, no materials, no tools, no advantages. But they had also given him a room made of crystal, walls that had stored starlight for millions of years. They had given him a suit full of technology. They had given him a body full of elements, carbon, iron, calcium, traces of 100 different minerals. They had given him a human mind. Smiled in the darkness. And he began to work. 3 hours passed. The viewing gallery buzzed with conversation as aliens watched the competitors work. Most of the attention was on the favorites. The illuminated one had already created a blade of frozen mathematics, a weapon that could cut through the space between atoms. Al was hammering a massive war axe from metals that burned with inner fire. Nobody was watching the human. Still floated in his empty chamber. He had not moved in over an hour. His eyes were closed. His breathing was slow and steady. To the aliens watching, he looked like he had given up. Some thought he might be sleeping. Ambassador paced back and forth in the human section of the gallery. Her aides tried to calm her down, but she could not sit still. Every minute that passed was another minute wasted. Every second of inaction was another step toward humanity's imprisonment in their home system. "He's just floating there," she muttered. "Why isn't he doing anything?" "Perhaps the human has accepted defeat," said an observer nearby. Its crystal body glowed with soft blue light. "Your species is young. There is no shame in failing a trial that has broken civilizations far older than yours." Wanted to argue, but she had no words. She did not know well. She had only met him twice before, once when he was selected for this mission and once on the transport ship that brought them here. Both times he had seemed ordinary, quiet, unimpressive. She had asked the selection committee why they chose him. They had shown her his file, a metallurgist from a research institute, nothing special. But then they showed her the incident report from 3 years ago. A factory explosion. 17 workers trapped in a burning building. No rescue possible for at least 2 hours. Had been visiting the factory that day, inspecting their metal samples. When the explosion happened, he was trapped with the others. He had no tools, no equipment, nothing but factory scraps and his own knowledge. By the time rescue arrived, he had built a ventilation system from broken pipes, a fire suppressant from chemical waste, and a medical station from torn cloth and melted plastic. All 17 workers survived. The committee had chosen him not because he was the best weaponsmith. They chose him because he was the best at making something from nothing. But right now he was making nothing from nothing, and was losing hope. In the chamber opened his eyes. He had spent 3 hours studying the problem. Not the obvious problem, how to forge a weapon without materials. The real problem, the deeper problem. What did they actually want? They said they wanted a weapon, but they had weapons that could crack planets. They had technology that could reshape reality. They did not need more weapons. No, they wanted something else. They wanted to understand what humanity could offer. They wanted to see how humans thought, how they solved problems, how they faced the impossible. Understood this now, and he understood something else too. They had made a mistake. They thought they had given him nothing, but nothing is not the same as empty. Empty space still contains things, vacuum energy, quantum fluctuations, the fabric of spacetime itself. And the chamber was not even truly empty. It had walls, it had structure, it had history. More importantly, had not entered the chamber naked. He had his environment suit, and inside that suit was a universe of materials. He reached for the emergency beacon on his chest. It was a small device about the size of his thumb, standard equipment, meant to signal for rescue if everything went wrong. He cracked it open. Inside he found exactly what he expected. A small lithium battery, copper wiring, a piezoelectric crystal, and a tiny circuit board. Not much, but not nothing either. He pulled out the copper wire first. It was thin, meant only to carry emergency signals. But copper was copper. It could conduct electricity. It could be shaped. He wrapped the wire around his finger, creating a tiny coil. Then he connected it to the lithium battery. The current was weak, barely enough to power a small light, but it was enough to create a magnetic field. Floated to the nearest wall of his chamber. The walls were made of crystal, the same material that made up the Arbiter's body. It was one of the strongest substances in the known universe. It had survived the deaths of stars and the births of black holes. But it had a weakness. Every material has a resonance frequency, a specific vibration that makes it shake, makes it crack, makes it break. Had learned this in his first year of metallurgy school. It was basic science, simple knowledge. He touched his tiny electromagnet to the crystal wall and began to pulse the current. On and off, on and off. Each pulse sent a small vibration through the crystal. Each vibration was meaningless by itself, but together, over time, they built up. The observer in the gallery leaned forward. What is the human doing? Other aliens turned to look. The human was pressing something against the wall of his chamber. It seemed pointless. The walls were unbreakable. 10 minutes passed, 20, 30. Then something impossible happened. A tiny piece of crystal broke free from the wall. It was smaller than a grain of sand. It floated in the vacuum, catching the distant light of the viewing gallery. The entire chamber went silent. He damaged the trial chamber, someone whispered. Is that allowed? The Arbiter rose from its seat. Its purple crystal body pulsed with complex emotions. For 9 million years, no competitor had ever tried to use the chamber itself as a material source. The rules said they would be given nothing. The rules did not say they couldn't take something. The human had found a loophole that no one had ever imagined. Did not pause to celebrate. He collected the tiny crystal fragment and continued his work. Pulse after pulse, vibration after vibration, grain after grain. It was slow. It was painful. His fingers were going numb from the cold. His oxygen was running low. His body was tired. But he did not stop. In the gallery was crying. She did not know why. She just watched this ordinary man do an extraordinary thing, and something in her chest broke open with pride. On Earth, held her phone with shaking hands. The broadcast was being watched by every human alive. Billions of people sat in silence as harvested crystals from the walls of an alien trial chamber. "Is winning?" asked. "I don't know, baby, but he's not losing, and for right now that's enough." 6 hours passed, had collected enough crystal fragments to fill his palm. His oxygen was at 40%. His heating element was failing. Frost was forming inside his helmet. But he had what he needed. The first step was complete. Now came the hard part. He arranged the crystal fragments in a careful pattern. He pulled out the piezoelectric crystal from his beacon, a tiny stone that could convert pressure into electricity. He positioned it at the center of the arrangement. Then he struck it with his frozen finger. The piezoelectric crystal sparked. The spark jumped to the crystals, and something beautiful happened. The crystal fragments began to glow, soft at first, then brighter. The light grew and grew until it had to shield his eyes. It was warm. It was alive. It was impossible. He had created fire from nothing. No, not fire. Something better. The crystals were releasing stored energy, light they had absorbed from ancient stars over millions of years. They were batteries and had figured out how to make them discharge. He had made a torch. In the viewing gallery, 12,000 aliens stared in disbelief. A being made of magnetic fields whispered to its companion. The illuminated one stopped working on its own weapon to watch the human. Even Al paused its hammering. The human had light. The human had heat. The human had possibility. The arbiter sat back down slowly. For the first time in a very long time, it felt something it had almost forgotten. Curiosity. What would this strange mortal creature do next? The torch changed everything. For 9 hours had been a joke. A small creature floating in darkness, doing nothing while ancient beings crafted weapons of impossible power. The aliens had laughed at humanity. They had the young species that sent such a weak champion. Now they watched in silence. The torch burned with golden light. It was not true fire. There was no air in the chamber to burn. It was something stranger, something older. Stored starlight, released from crystal prisons after millions of years of waiting. The light flickered and danced like it was alive, like it remembered the stars it came from. Held the torch carefully. His hands were shaking, partly from cold, partly from exhaustion, mostly from the weight of what he had done. He had created light from nothing. He had proven that the human mind could find possibility where others saw only emptiness. But he was not finished. A torch was not a weapon. He checked his suit's display. Oxygen at 32%, heating at 15%, core temperature dropping steadily. He had maybe 8 hours before his body started shutting down. 8 hours to forge something worthy of cosmic recognition. He got to work. The first problem was materials. He had crystal fragments, but crystals were brittle. They could cut, but they would shatter on impact. He needed something stronger, something that could hold an edge and survive combat. He looked at his hands, his frozen, bleeding hands. Human blood contains iron. Not much, about 4 grams in the average adult body, but iron was iron, and had learned long ago that you work with what you have, not what you wish you had. He removed his helmet carefully, exposing his face to the vacuum for just a moment. The cold hit him like a hammer. He felt his skin freeze, felt the moisture on his eyes turn to ice. But he was fast. He took a deep breath from his suit's reserve and sealed the helmet again. In that brief moment, he had collected something precious. Ice crystals from his own breath, containing trace amounts of every element in his body. It wasn't much. It was barely anything, but it was a start. He repeated this process twice more, each time risking permanent damage. On the third time, he cut his finger with a sharp crystal fragment. Blood floated in the vacuum, freezing instantly into red droplets. He collected these too. The aliens in the gallery were horrified and fascinated. The observer spoke in a hushed voice. "The human is using his own body as material." "That is unexpected," another observer replied. "It is more than unexpected. It is unprecedented. No species has ever damaged themselves to complete this trial." Ambassador gripped the railing so hard her knuckles turned white. She wanted to tell to stop, to be careful, to not hurt himself. But she could not. This was his choice, his sacrifice, his gift to humanity. On Earth had sent to bed. The little girl had not wanted to go, she wanted to watch her father. But it was late, and some things were not meant for children to see. Now sat alone, watching her husband bleed in the darkness of space. She remembered the day they met, 14 years ago. He had been a young student then, working part-time at a metal workshop. She had come in to repair a broken bicycle. He had fixed the bicycle in 10 minutes, using tools that should not have worked and techniques he invented on the spot. When she asked how he did it, he smiled and said, "Everything can be fixed. You just have to understand what it wants to be." She had fallen in love with that smile, that confidence, that strange certainty that every problem had a solution if only you looked hard enough. Now she prayed that certainty would not get him killed. In the chamber had gathered enough materials: crystal fragments, frozen breath, blood droplets, copper wire, piezoelectric dust, the remains of his emergency beacon. He held his torch close and began to work. The heat from the stored starlight was intense but focused. He could direct it, control it, shape it like a precision tool. He began by melting the crystal fragments, watching them flow like water before cooling into new shapes. He added the iron from his blood, mixing it with the crystal in ways that no metallurgist on Earth had ever attempted. The alloy that formed was unlike anything he had seen before. It glowed with a faint inner light, like the crystals remembered their connection to ancient stars. It was stronger than either material alone, the crystal providing hardness, the iron providing flexibility. And there was something else too, something he had not expected. The alloy resonated. When he touched it, he could feel vibrations running through the metal, patterns of energy that pulsed in rhythm with something. He was not sure what, but it felt alive. He shaped the alloy into a blade. It was small, no longer than his forearm. He did not have enough material for anything larger, but size did not matter. What mattered was what the blade could do. He used the copper wire to wrap a handle, insulating it from the strange energies in the metal. He padded the grip with fabric torn from inside his suit, another sacrifice that left him colder and more vulnerable. Finally, he examined his creation. It was not beautiful. It was not elegant. It looked like what it was, a desperate attempt by a dying man to create something from nothing. The blade was rough, the handle uneven, the whole thing slightly crooked. But it was real. It existed. He had made it with his own hands, his own blood, his own determination. Allowed himself a small smile, then he went back to work. Because the blade was not finished, he could feel potential in the metal, possibilities he had not yet explored. The resonance frequency he had discovered. What would happen if he tuned it differently? What if he changed the pattern of the crystals, redirected the stored starlight, altered the fundamental nature of the weapon? He had 4 hours left. 4 hours of oxygen, 4 hours of heat, 4 hours of life, and he intended to use every second. In the gallery, the mood had shifted completely. No one was laughing at the human anymore. No one was ignoring him. Every eye in the chamber was fixed on the small figure in the empty cube, watching him work with tools he had built from nothing, materials he had harvested from his own body, fire he had stolen from ancient stars. The Arbiter had not moved in hours. It simply watched, its purple crystal body pulsing with emotions that had no names in any human language. "He might actually do it," someone whispered. "Impossible," another replied. "Even if he creates something, it cannot compare to the weapons of the elder races." But even as they spoke, doubt crept into their voices, because they had seen what the human could do with nothing, and they were beginning to wonder what he might do with something. Did not hear them. He was lost in his work, in the rhythm of creation, in the joy of making something new. His hands moved automatically, guided by instinct and experience. His mind raced ahead, seeing possibilities that had not yet become real. He was cold. He was tired. He was dying by degrees in the empty darkness of an alien trial chamber. But he was also alive, more alive than he had ever been. And he was not going to stop until the very end. 28 hours had passed since the trial began. The forge chambers were opening one by one. Competitors emerged with their creations, presenting them to the Arbiter for judgment. Each weapon was more impressive than the last. Al had forged a war axe from stellar metals. When it swung through the air, it left trails of burning light. The blade could cut through ship armor like paper. The Dominion representative stood proud, confident that no one could match such destruction. The illuminated one presented something that hurt to look at, a blade made of pure mathematics, equations folded into sharp edges that could slice through the fabric of reality itself. Observers who stared too long at it reported headaches and strange visions. The shapeshifter had divided itself permanently, sacrificing half its mass to create a living weapon that could change form at will. It was sword, spear, shield, and chain all at once. The sacrifice had cost it dearly, but the result was remarkable. One by one, the elder races showed what millions of years of evolution could achieve. Planet crackers, dimension cutters, weapons that could end civilizations with a single stroke. The viewing gallery applauded each creation, acknowledging the power and skill on display. Then the last chamber opened. Floated out slowly. His suit was damaged. Frost covered his visor. His skin had turned pale from cold and blood loss. He moved like a man who had fought a war against the universe itself and barely survived. In his hand, he carried a small knife. The gallery went quiet, not with respect but with confusion. After everything they had witnessed, the torch, the crystal harvesting, the blood sacrifice, the human had made a knife. A simple blade no longer than his forearm. Made a sound that might have been laughter. This is the best humanity can offer, a cutting tool for vegetables. Some aliens joined in the mockery. Others simply looked away, embarrassed for the human species. Ambassador felt her heart break. She had believed in. She had defended his selection to critics who said humanity should send their most brilliant scientist, their most advanced engineer. She had trusted him. And he had made a knife. Approached the Arbiter's platform. His legs were weak, but he forced them to carry him forward. Each step was an act of will. Each breath was a small victory. The Arbiter looked down at him. Its crystal form towered 4 meters above the small human. Light passed through its body, casting rainbow shadows on the floor. "Present your weapon, human." Held up the knife. In the bright lights of the gallery it looked even more pathetic than before. Rough edges, uneven blade, a handle wrapped in torn cloth. Next to the godlike weapons of the elder races, it was nothing. "I present my creation," said. His voice was rough from hours of silence. a blade forged from crystal, human blood, and stored starlight. The Arbiter examined the knife without touching it. After a long moment it spoke. "This is primitive. The weapons presented today could destroy solar systems. Yours could barely cut flesh." "It's not finished," replied. "Explain." Lowered the knife for a moment. He looked around the gallery at the thousands of alien faces watching him. He saw curiosity in some, contempt in others, indifference in most. He saw Ambassador, tears running down her face. He thought of and waiting for him on Earth. Then he raised the knife again. "This blade is made from your walls, your ancestors' light, and my blood. It exists because I refuse to believe that nothing meant nothing. It exists because humans do not see obstacles. We see materials we have not figured out how to use yet." He paused, letting the words settle. The gallery was completely silent now. Every weapon presented today was built to destroy. Maximum damage, maximum efficiency, beautiful and terrifying. They assume that the only purpose of a weapon is to end things. He turned the knife slowly, letting light catch the strange alloy. The crystal fragments embedded in the metal began to glow softly, resonating with the Arbiter's own crystalline form. "But I am not done yet. I can finish this blade 2 ways." The Arbiter leaned forward. 2 ways. "The first way makes it sharp, so sharp it will cut through your crystalline body like air, war-ready, built to kill." "And the second?" Met the Arbiter's gaze directly. No fear, no hesitation, just a simple question from a simple man. "The second way uses the resonance frequency I discovered in your crystal. Instead of cutting, it heals. The same light that your species stored from ancient suns, I can make it flow into wounds, seal them, restore damaged tissue." He paused. "Mercy safe, built to save." The gallery erupted. Aliens shouted in a dozen languages. Some demanded explanation. Others called it impossible. The illuminated one flickered with complex mathematical patterns, trying to process what it had heard. Slammed its massive fists against the railing in confusion. The Arbiter raised one crystalline limb, and silence fell instantly. "You are telling me," it said slowly, "that your weapon can either kill or heal, and you are asking me to choose." "Yes." "Why would you give such power to another? You could decide yourself. You could keep both options and use whichever serves you best." Smiled. It was the same smile had fallen in love with, the smile that said every problem has a solution. "Because that is what makes us different," he said. "Every other competitor came here to show you their power. They wanted to prove they were strong enough to stand beside the elder races. They wanted respect through force." He lowered the knife, offering the handle toward the Arbiter. "I do not want to prove I am strong. I want to prove I am useful. And being useful means understanding what others need, not just assuming I know best." The Arbiter did not move. Its crystal form pulsed with colors that shifted too fast for human eyes to follow. "In 12,000 years of trials," it finally said, "no species has ever asked us what we needed. No species has ever offered choice instead of force. No species has ever seen us as partners rather than judges." It paused. "Until now." Ambassador stopped breathing. The entire human delegation froze in place. On Earth, billions of people stared at their screens, waiting for the next words. The Arbiter reached out with one crystalline limb. Slowly, gently, it closed fingers around the knife handle. "Finish it as mercy-safe human." Bowed his head. "I will need your help. The resonance frequency must match your physiology exactly. I will need to study your crystal structure, understand how your bodies store and release energy. You are asking to learn our deepest secrets. I am asking to help you, and help requires understanding." The Arbiter was silent for a long moment. Light passed through its body in waves, as if thoughts were racing beneath the surface. Then it did something unprecedented. It knelt down, bringing its massive crystalline form to level. It extended one limb, palm up. Then learn, human. Teach us how you see nothing and find everything, and perhaps we can teach you something in return. Reached out and touched the crystal surface. It was warm, vibrating with ancient energy. He could feel patterns beneath the surface, memories of stars long dead, songs of creation from the beginning of time. "Thank you," he whispered. Behind him, Ambassador finally let herself breathe. Tears fell freely down her face as she watched the small human shake hands with an ancient god. On Earth, held her phone with trembling hands. When woke up tomorrow, she would tell her daughter what happened. She would explain that her father had done something no one had ever done before. He had made friends with the stars. 3 days after the trial, stood in the healing chamber. His body was wrapped in soft light, ancient starlight that mended flesh and restored strength. The crystal beings had used their own medical technology to save him, technology they had never shared with outsiders before. Ambassador visited him every few hours. She brought news from Earth, messages from his family, updates on the political situation. Humanity had been granted full recognition. More importantly, they had been granted something unprecedented, an invitation to join thee in their sacred forged temples. "They want you to stay," told him. "They are asking you to become their first human student. They want to learn how you think." Laughed softly. The movement hurt his ribs, but he did not care. "I am just a metallurgist. I work with metal and fire, nothing special. You created light from nothing. You offered peace to beings who have known only power for 9 million years. You changed everything." He was quiet for a moment. "I just asked the right question. And that question is spreading." She showed him the reports. Across the galaxy, species were talking about the human trial, not about the spectacular weapons of the elder races, but about the small knife that could heal or harm, about the mortal who asked what others needed instead of assuming he knew best. The phrase had already become famous. "Do you need it mercy-safe or war-ready?" Trade negotiations between hostile species were beginning with that question. Military conflicts that had lasted centuries were pausing for discussion. The illuminated ones, who had not communicated with physical beings in 10,000 years, had sent a formal request to study human philosophy. "You started something," said, "something bigger than you realize." Closed his eyes. He thought of and waiting for him on Earth. He thought of the small apartment they shared, the broken bicycle that brought them together, the ordinary life he had built. "I want to go home," he said. "You can. They said you are free to leave whenever you choose. They just hope you will return someday." "Tell them I will. But first I need to see my daughter. I need to hold my wife. I need to remember why I did all this in the first place." Nodded, she understood. For all the cosmic significance of what had happened was still a man, a father, a husband. He had saved humanity not because he wanted glory, but because he wanted to protect the people he loved. 1 week later, his transport ship landed in Seoul. It was early morning. The sun was just beginning to rise over the city, painting the buildings in shades of gold and pink. A crowd had gathered at the landing site. Government officials, military leaders, scientists, journalists. Millions of people watched from their homes as the ship's door opened. Stepped out slowly. He was still recovering from his injuries. He walked with a slight limp, and his hands were bandaged where he had burned them forging his blade. But when he saw and waiting at the edge of the crowd, he forgot his pain. He pushed through the officials and journalists. He ignored the cameras and microphones. He walked straight to his family and dropped to his knees. Ran into his arms. "You won." "I did not win," he whispered into her hair. "I just asked a good question." Knelt beside them, wrapping her arms around both of them. She was crying and laughing at the same time. "I am so proud of you. I was so scared. I am sorry I worried you." Do not ever do that again." He smiled against her shoulder. "I cannot promise that, but I can promise I will always come back to you." They stayed like that for a long moment, a family reunited while the galaxy watched. Cameras captured the image and broadcast it across 1,000 worlds. Alien species who had never understood human emotions saw something they could not explain: a simple man holding his wife and daughter, crying with joy. The Arbiter watched the broadcast from its chamber between the dying stars. It had not slept since the trial ended. It had spent every moment thinking about the human, about the question, about the knife that could heal or harm. For 9 million years they had judged other species by their power. They had measured worth in destruction, potential in violence. It was the way things had always been done. The strong survived. The weak were protected or eliminated. But the human had shown them another way. What if power was not the point? What if worth could be measured differently? What if the purpose of existence was not to dominate but to help? The Arbiter reached out with its crystalline limb and touched the knife had left behind. The human had completed it before leaving, tuning the resonance frequency exactly as he had promised. The blade glowed softly with healing light. It was beautiful, simple and rough and imperfect, but beautiful. The Arbiter made a decision. It would share this blade with every species in the galaxy. It would tell the story of the human who forged it. It would ask the question that had never been asked before. And perhaps slowly, the galaxy would learn to answer differently. Years passed. Returned to his research institute. He worked on normal projects: better alloys for construction, new materials for medicine, small improvements to everyday technology. He never sought fame or power. He lived quietly with his family and watched grow up. But every few years, he would receive a visitor from space. Sometimes it was a student, come to learn his techniques. Sometimes it was an ambassador from a species he had never heard of, wanting to discuss the philosophy of the question. Sometimes it was just a message, a recording of two enemies choosing peace because someone remembered to ask what the other truly needed. The knife he had forged became legend. It was given a name in every language across the galaxy. In Korean, they called it Kal, human blade. In the language of it had a name that meant the first choice. But most species simply called it what it was: proof that the smallest creature could change everything. Proof that nothing was truly nothing. Proof that the right question was worth more than the mightiest weapon. Lived to be 93 years old. He died peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by his family. His last words were to, now a grandmother herself. "Remember," he told her, "always ask what they need, always offer choice. The universe is not made of enemies, it is made of problems waiting to be solved." She buried him on a hill overlooking Seoul, where the sunrise painted the city gold. She placed flowers on his grave and spoke the words he had taught her. "Mercy safe or war ready. The choice is yours, but please, please choose mercy." Across the galaxy, in a chamber between dying stars, the Arbiter felt something it had never felt before. A deep sadness and a deep gratitude for a mortal creature who had lived only a moment and changed everything. It whispered into the starlight, knowing somehow that the human would hear. "Thank you, little one, for lighting the torch, for asking the question, for showing us that nothing is never truly nothing." The starlight flickered, and somewhere, in a way that made no scientific sense, smiled. His work was done, the torch would keep burning. And the galaxy would never be the same.